And just so folks know, this webinar is being live streamed. It might have just come across your screen, but I just wanted to let everyone know just in case. And also, I apologize if you hear my puppy in the background. He just wants to join. Okay, everyone. So we are going to start. Welcome to today's webinar, Loving Lessons from Our Equity, Reconciliation, and Belonging Journey. Today we have Danya, Pastuszek, Dina, Al-khooly, who is a Tamarack member, and Danya's our Tamarack CEO and President. Allison Homer, who's Tamarack's Director of Learning, Evaluations, and Systems Change. Guyana Sky, who is a Ganakahega community helper, First Nations advisor to Tamarack, and an amazing matriarch that we've had the opportunity to work with. And Jodine Baker, who's Imagine Canada's VP of Research, Advocacy, and External Relations. So we have so many amazing people on this panel today. My name is Shanice Green, and I'm the Senior Community Animator of Equity, Anti-Racism, and Reconciliation for Tamarack. And today I'll be opening up with community acknowledgments and connecting with you all in the chat by answering questions, sharing resources, and contributing my knowledge and experience. So today's conversation will be hosted by Rochelle Ignacio, who's Tamarack's Equity, Anti-Racism, and Reconciliation Director. And behind the scenes, we have Mairead Stewart. You might see them, who will be offering technical support. So please reach out to them if you're running into any kind of difficulties. Don't worry, Mairead's amazing when it comes to this tech stuff. So lots of support on that end. So I'm also going to acknowledge where I'm calling in from today, which is the traditional territory of the Kickapoo and Potawatomi people in Decatur, Illinois. And I do want to get into our Tamarack acknowledgments, but I'm going to personalize them a little bit because I think that's super important when we're talking about our relationship and connection to the land. So we at Tamarack Institute recognize that the majority of our work occurs on the ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples, including the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. And we recognize the contributions of Indigenous people and support their ongoing struggle for self-determination and sovereignty. And we work to understand the history of the lands upon which we are guests and contribute to justice for all Indigenous peoples. So what does that mean? What does that mean when we think about that? Before we got started, Danya and I were having a conversation about our names and the connection to place and land. And when we think about the work that we're doing here at Tamarack, it's not just about the relationships that we have with people. It's not just about the relationships that we build in spaces like this. It's about the relationship that we have to the land and to the people that are connected to the land in ways in which so many of us are. It's about acknowledging that sovereignty and self-determination of First Nation Inuit peoples. And what does that really mean? It means allowing to let them lead. It means being listeners sometimes when we want to speak. And it means having the humility and the understanding that others have knowledges that we may not have, that might honor the land in different ways and sometimes in better ways. And so as we move through this, I invite you all to share which lands you're connecting from, to think about your relationship to the land, not just through First Nation and Métis and Inuit people, but what is your personal relationship to the land? What does it mean for you to be in community with us all today on the lands that you're calling in from? I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge those who came to Turtle Island as migrants or in this generation or in past generations, and people of descent of enslaved people. When we think about those who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to us through the lands of the result of the transatlantic slave trade, Tamarack pays tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent and thank them for their contributions towards transforming systems in ways that promotes everyone's sense of being and safety. So again, what does that mean? It means honoring the history of those who are descendants of enslaved people on these lands. It means giving them back their humanity that's been taken in so many different ways. It means honoring the fight for resilience and equity on these lands that still exists amongst Black folks, Black descended folks, African descended folks. It means honoring their truths when we talk about anti-Black racism on these lands. and it means amplifying voices that are oftentimes erased and unheard. So at this time, I invite you to please use the chat box again to introduce yourself, your organizations, which lands you're calling in from, and any questions you are bringing to today's call. Remember, we're all in community here today, so please ask any question that you would like. And if you're afraid to ask, don't be afraid to personally DM me or Mairead, and we can share those questions for you. Through the seeds of transformation, Tamarack has made an equity commitment, which is grounded in the French word paragration. I always have a hard time with this word. And I think it's important because it's, regardless of me having a hard time pronouncing it, it's a meaning of meandering voyage. Our equity, anti-racism, and reconciliation work is transformative. It is a journey of seeking equitable outcomes across communities. And sometimes that means using words that we don't know how to pronounce and trying to pronounce it and trying to find ways to honor those words. We will take bold and informed actions to address systemic inequities. And throughout this process, we will strive for fair and just methods. We'll be honest and transparent in our communication about our journey. And this journey needs as many people as possible. And we're grateful to do this work with so many others, including you all here who are here to listen today. So I'll now turn it over to Mairead, who's going to run us through today's tech considerations.
Hi, Shanice. Thank you so much. I will now talk a little bit about the tech and tech support. The first thing I'll talk about is addressing harm in virtual spaces. When we join this webinar, we agree that we are going to be part of a community together that is supportive and kind to one another. Our priority and our responsibility is to protect the safety and well-being of us as staff and of you, members of our learning community. So by joining today, you are agreeing to participate with openness and kindness to all. I'd also love to talk about the tech considerations. After this call, you will receive a full recording of this webinar today through an email. It will come usually 1 to 2 days after the call. You'll also receive all the links we shared in the chat, as well as any other relevant resources that we talk about today. We encourage you to join the conversation. We would love if you submitted some questions for our panelists today. There is a Q&A function on Zoom. Usually it's at the bottom of your screen, but sometimes you need to click on the More button to see it. If you're having trouble finding it, please reach out to me personally and I can help you with that. Also, you're welcome to share resources in the chat and engage with one another in the chat. If you have any other questions or need any support, I am here to support. And I will now pass it to Rochelle.
Thanks so much, Shanice and Mairead, for opening us up in the good way and making sure that we can all navigate the webinar. It's amazing to see everyone who's joined the call. I see, like someone had said, they're from South Africa, people from the States, UK, as well as I see some friends of mine from Edmonton, where I'm calling in from as well. So welcome. My name's Rochelle Ignacio. My pronouns are she, her. Over the last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of being able to be Tamarack's Director of Equity, Anti-Racism, and Reconciliation. As I said, I'm calling in from Treaty 6 territory and the Métis North Saskatchewan territory, which is known as Amishkawashka and translates to Beaver Hills House. And colonially, we refer to it as Edmonton. It's home to the Nehiyah, Dene, Anishinaabe, Nakota Iska, and Niitsitapi people. Tamarack is a connected force for community change, and we build the capacity of change makers in cities and communities within Canada and around the world to solve major community challenges, including ending poverty, building youth futures, deepening community, and addressing climate change. And we believe that we need to embed equity across our community change efforts if we're truly to address equity disparity gaps and continue to place people continue to work to move people who are at the margins of society and center them in our community change efforts. This is a continuation of our Seeds of Transformation webinar series, part one. Danya was the host of that webinar. It happened last year, and it had Sunshine Chen, who's one of Tamarack's board members, and Ruth Nicola, who led the equity audit from Power of Discourse Consulting. In this follow-up, we're really excited to bring this panel together. We have many speakers that you can see on the slide in front of you, but we want to be able to make Seeds of Transformation more accessible, talk about the many resources that are available, and really find ways to make what's contained within this 70, 80-page document approachable to our network of learners, members, and partners. And that's you that's in today's audience. We want to reintroduce Imagine Canada's equity benchmarking project, and this was used in our engagement and evaluation phases of our work. And we want our panelists to share openly, respectfully, and honestly about our peregrination, our journey, including the achievements we're celebrating, but also the curiosities and challenges that we've experienced along the way. This work's not possible without everyone in Tamarack's network, from our incredible staff and board teams who each have accountabilities within our action plan, the members and learners who inform the framework and action plan and guide how we're centering diverse voices and accessibility, our partners who have helped guide our journey through resourcing us with tools, skills and knowledge, financial capital that's needed to end poverty in all forms by closing equity disparity gaps across communities. I'm now going to start introducing the panelists, starting with Jodine Baker from Imagine Canada. And so Jodine, I welcome you to come off mute and introduce yourself and just talk more about the project.
Thanks, Rochelle, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. As mentioned, my name is Jodine Baker. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Vice President of Research, Advocacy, and External Relations at Imagine Canada. I'm joining you from Winnipeg, which is located in Treaty 1 territory, the home of and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. It was a very misty, foggy morning here this morning. It looked very gloomy, but it has since dissipated, and I'm looking up at the little window I have here, and it's a brilliant fall sky, and I get to see just hints of a tree that now has yellow leaves on it. And every season, I feel like I say, this is my favorite season, but I love looking at trees and seeing how they change against the sky and the patterns. And I'm doing so, I really try to always intentionally feel that gratitude for the people who took care and steward this land before me, and recognize the privilege that I have to live and share on this space. So hope everyone's taking some time to look at what the trees look like in their part of the world today. It's a pleasure to be here today as part of Tamarack's Seeds of Transformation series. I want to recognize Tamarack's leadership in embedding equity, anti-racism, and reconciliation into community change. What really inspires me about this work is how it moves beyond ideas and frameworks to practical tools and accountability, making equity something organizations actively live out. A few years ago at Imagine Canada, we undertook the Equity Benchmarking Project, which was the first national initiative to examine equity, diversity, and inclusion practices across charities and nonprofits. The results showed both progress and persistent gaps. For example, while more than 80% of organizations expressed a strong commitment to equity, only about half had concrete goals or accountability mechanisms in place. 2/3 of senior leaders identified as white, highlighting ongoing underrepresentation of equity-denied groups in leadership. And many smaller organizations told us they wanted to do better, but lacked the resources, data, or know-how to take the next steps. So what excites me today is seeing Tamarack take that research and put it into practice. So using the findings to shape engagement questions in their audit and to guide reflections on equity in their own work. This is exactly what we at Imagine Canada and the broader group that we worked with, the Equity Recovery Collective, which was a group of volunteer advisors from across the sector, when we came together, this is what we envisioned. So evidence sparking action and action driving change. For our sector, for folks who work in the nonprofit and charitable sector, equity can't be an afterthought. It's foundational to what we do. It's foundational to trust, to legitimacy, and to the impact we want to have in communities. And none of us can do this alone. It requires us to have openness, humility, that ongoing unlearning and relearning and collaboration across networks like Tamarack's. I'm really looking forward today to hearing from our panelists as they share both achievements and challenges from their journey. These conversations really do help us all deepen our work and keep equity at the center of community change. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodine. So many important remarks, but I just love how you've grounded that you can look at these reports, but you can also take the reports, contextualize them to your organization as Tamarack has done, and use them to what we're doing is we use the questions in our engagement phase, and we're using that as benchmark data so that we can go back and really measure where our progress is at. And I know that the equity benchmarking project is not complete. They're still thinking about ways in which they can continue to connect with the nonprofit sector and support their own equity journeys. So make sure to pay attention to the important work that they're doing. I'm going to now introduce Guy, who's a matriarch from Ganawage, I've actually known Guy my entire time at Tamarack for the last 3 years. So just really grateful for the many conversations, wisdom, and learning that you've offered. So over to you, Guy.
Tego Watganawardado Zewakwego. Guyana Sky is my name. I'm calling in from Ganawage, Ganyangahaga territory, which is on the south shore of Montreal, Jojage. I'm kind of speechless because I see all these beautiful faces of the women in leadership who have been doing the work. And even though I've been with Tamarack, to me it's a short time since Tamarack was introduced to my community back in 2000, I want to say 15, 16. And I think part of the work that I've come to understand of what I'm doing is becoming that matriarch is paving the way for my family to take notice of how we need to be more inclusive in our world. So when I think of equity and I think of transformation and I think of reconciliation, belonging, and all these beautiful words, I think of the simplicity of leadership is by doing. And when you can step into who you are as a human being and step into who you are of what you bring with your ancestors, I think that the work gets easier, put it that way. At first it seems difficult, but it really does get easier. So stepping into being a matriarch and being an advisor and helping is, I think it's not a job, it's a responsibility that I think we agree to long before we come here. And I think that's why we're here all together. Everybody in the audience who decided to click on today, we're all here to make our world better in troubled times. And the more we can grow our own self-love and our being to be that light for the world, the better we're all off to be. So it's a privilege for me to be here today and to be with everyone. And go for including me. And welcome everybody.
Thank you so much. You're absolutely right. This is a journey that we're all on, and it's okay that we're at different parts of our journey. And we all need to just be open to growth. And I know I learn things every day in my own practice as someone who's leading this work at Tamarack, and I encourage you to be open to that learning as well. I'm now going to introduce Dina Al-khooly, who is one of Tamarack's board members and also sits on the Board Equity, Anti-Racism, and Reconciliation Committee.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all kind of so much for that grounding. I'm joining from Dish with One Spoon Treaty Territory, the traditional lands of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. I'm in my office in downtown Toronto. I don't get to see the outside right now, but really appreciate kind of the visual Jodine about the leaves and the trees. I'm imagining it. My name is Dina. I've been with the Tamarack board for about 3 years. And I joined when I was at a community organization called Visions of Science, where we worked alongside youth and families to develop science literacy and leadership, particularly in low-income and racialized communities across the Greater Toronto Area. And at the time, pretty much all of us as staff had kind of lived experience growing up in the communities we were working in or in similar communities. And I really leaned on kind of Tamarack learning supports to help guide our work when it came to asset-based community development and evaluation. I'm now in a policy role at the Ontario Public Service, begrudgingly. And since joining the board, I've been really interested in how our board navigates equity issues. And there's been a lot of work that's happened that kind of preceded my time that I'm very lucky to benefit from the legacy of. And so I'm very honored to be here among all of my esteemed co-panelists and really excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Dina. Just like thinking back on that journey, a thread, like you started at one organization, but you've like continued your time and grown and to like actually be on the Tamarack board now. And I just appreciate the approach that you bring to all the conversations. I think you've pushed the board, you've pushed Tamarack leadership, and you've pushed myself to really think about what are the words that we're saying and how do our actions align with those words, and just really grateful for your gentle and thoughtful approach that you bring. Next, I'm going to have Allison come and introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Allison Homer. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Tamarack's Director of Learning, Evaluation, and Systems Change. I've been with Tamarack almost 10 years and spent most of my time with Communities Ending Poverty. My work now focuses on building an organizational culture of learning and reflection. So one where we can really use data to help us iterate, improve, and grow our impact, as well as to tell the story of how we're changing systems in ways that close equity gaps. Gaius, I love how you mentioned we're here to make our world a better place. So I feel really fortunate to be here amongst all of you today so we can talk about how we can do that. Honoring the nations on whose traditional lands and unceded territory I'm calling in from, the Sinaiks, the Tunaha, the Shikwapam, and the Silks.
Thanks, Allison. I know Allison's going to be talking about how we're using data to make informed decisions throughout this webinar today. Allison is one of my deepest collaborators when it comes to the framework, because we're often talking about, should we be collecting demographic data at this stage? How's the best way to collect it? How are staff advancing the actions? What are the challenges? How are we measuring progress? So excited to get into the nitty-gritty of that conversation. And now we're going to hear from Danya.
Thank you, Rochelle. Salut, merci de participer à cette conversation, everyone. I'm traveling today and joining you from the traditional territory of the Danya people. Ghanaians, hello from across the water here. Good to be so close to you geographically. I have been at Tamarack 3.5 years, but I think for my whole life, I've been a community builder. I'm privileged right now at this stage in my life to be a mother, and I'm deeply shaped by my mother and the mothers of my mother and my father, who taught me the value of starting with self-love and starting with the idea that we're all agents of change, and that really transformational change starts with seeing within ourselves what we contribute to and where those contributions are aligned with our purpose and where those contributions might not be. They also taught me the value of listening well. Gaius, the word responsibility feels relevant here, the responsibility to listen well. And right now, in the role that I hold for these past 3.5 years at Tamarack, I'm really working to listen for points where we can do work together across people who might not see what I have the privilege to see because of the conversations that I get to be in. So thank you all so much for being here. I see so many names in the chat of people who have shaped and nudged this journey and who continue to shape and nudge that journey. And I will just say to Aman, whose most recent comment is showing up for me, thank you for all you've contributed to the work that Jodine mentioned at Imagine Canada, and to everyone else here as well, who, as I mentioned, is contributing so deeply.
Thanks so much, Danya. Just following Danya's thread, as you can see, the commitments and priorities that you see within Seeds of Transformation is really being supported and uplifted by a diverse group of internal and external partners, as well as Indigenous right holders who are passionate to contribute their skills, knowledge in advancing our goal to end equity disparity gaps across communities. I'm going to now bring us into the conversation part of today's webinar. I do want to remind you that there is the Q&A icon usually at the bottom of your screen, but Mairead had let us know that it might be in the More section. But feel free to put your questions into there. If you're having a hard time navigating to that question and answer feature on the Zoom webinar, just DM Shanice or Mairead and they can do that for you. If you're shy to ask your question, they could also ask that question that way. Yeah, so I'm going to open the first question to everyone on the panel, but I'm really curious to know what part of the framework is resonating for you. So maybe we'll start with Dina, go to Allison, Guyaness, and then Danya.
Yeah, so I really love the kind of 4 dimensions framework that's laid out in the Seeds of Transformation. So thinking about our equity work in the sense of what does it mean for the personal, what does it mean for the interpersonal, what does it mean for community, and then what does it mean for power. And I just think that's such a kind of helpful frame to think through the different steps because it's I found very easy to get lost in just kind of one dimension. You're pouring your all into community and then maybe not nurturing the people who are working behind the scenes to make it happen. Or I've seen the opposite where organizations are so consumed with protecting folks' feelings, regardless of where those feelings are coming from, and moving at a pace that's really comfortable and, doesn't rub people the wrong way. And then it's kind of perpetually delaying that much needed action on the community and power side. So I'm someone who, I think has been deeply oriented towards power for kind of better or worse. And that's why I believe so much in kind of centering poverty and economic justice and, resource distribution and land ownership. Because at the end of the day, I think it's really important for our end game that we see change in power and, resources and land and water and people's natural and people's material conditions. But I do really believe it's all the steps, the personal, the interpersonal, the community, the cultural, that those are really the building blocks that help us get there. So I really appreciate that part of kind of the framework.
Thanks, Dina. Dina's referring to the 4 dimensions of love, and I believe Shanice or Mairead have shared that in the chat if you wanted to check out that resource. Over to you, Allison.
So mine also ties into the evaluation framework. I'm thinking about the priorities and mindsets that we've named. It's on page 33 in the framework. So the mindsets include when we think about data, how we value narratives alongside numbers, and how we center lived and living experience in our policies and practices as they evolve. Because we know that experiences provide those deep insights. They add really important nuance to our understanding of if and how we're making progress. And we also know that we don't make progress just by changing a policy, right? We make progress when the policy actually benefits people. So I really love that as part of this framework. It includes what kind of information do we need to gather to go beyond what the intention of the policy is to determine whether it's actually impacting people. And importantly, whether it's in positive or negative ways, if it's having intended or unintended consequences, because that's the only way we'll be able to adjust and improve.
Thanks, Allison. Just a follow-up. So thinking about our growth mindset, I know that we engaged in a lot of conversation about these questions that we're bringing in. Can you speak to some of the changes maybe that we made and how we're approaching evaluation?
I think one of the things we're doing is we're really taking an organization-wide approach. So with using the Darcy framework, the decision-making framework that's part of Seeds of Transformation, it's really bringing us together beyond our typical teams. So if you're part of the Communities Ending Poverty team, now you're working with groups of others across the organization to advance actions. We had a reflection week session where we helped we supported staff to build out what indicators might look like, how they might see success for these actions. And I really loved how that brought in the valuation framework. So we developed some metrics based on our initial thinking, what might we measure, but then we asked staff to look at each of those dimensions of love to figure out how we could better center people, the organization, communities, shifts in power, and to adapt those metrics to be more centered to those 4 dimensions.
Thanks, Allison. I think it's just a really good example of like from a professional development standpoint of taking resources within the framework and using it to really get staff to like get into the framework and think about what do these 4 dimensions of love look like, but also bringing staff across the organization to think about how do we actually define what success is. And it's not just Danya and myself and Shanice in our huddle thinking about, okay, this is how we define success, but empowering people in the organization to do that work. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Guy Ness to share your favorite part of the framework.
I think for me as well, I really appreciated part 3, the evaluation framework grounded in love. I always like to look at things in simplicity. And when I think about love, to me, it's simple because in our language, what that really means, is it's a feeling that's given between two beings, and we wrap ourselves around that, and it's precious. So we're always reminded that with the responsibility to be, we have to bring that forward in bringing our love. And when you bring your love forward and you understand that you're co-creating everything, every feeling, every effect, every outcome that's going to happen, you're a part of that when you're bringing your being to something. So I think when we look at, I think it's on page, I'm just going to check here quickly. It's page 32. I really love how it's worded there when you're looking at self-love, loving others, loving the community practice, and loving fused with power. I think how it's written, it's simple. It's easy to understand. And I think that the biggest meaningful word in there I can look at is about relationship. So it's relationship to ourselves, to others, especially our families and our community, because they're the people that hold us. They're the spaces that hold us. And when you're able to bring your true self within those spaces, you can share that with the rest of the world because it becomes easier, put it that way. And I think when you can find reciprocity and relationship with other people who share the same vision, it just makes it that much brighter.
Thanks, Guinness. I find the the loving valuation framework, one of the most abstract parts of Seeds of Transformation. And you're saying it's the most simple. And so I love that we can like just have like some diverse reactions to what's within the framework. I know one of our teams is looking at how can we take this like scary thing, like you might be thinking, how do I talk about love in my work? But we started talking about how can we reframe love into care, into compassion for our work. So you don't have to take everything that's in the Seeds of Transformation framework, contextualize it, make it comfortable to where you're at in your journey, where your organizations are at. Danya, we'll hear from you.
So one abstract piece that ties into a more pragmatic piece. I see a lot of you here in the audience who have taught me a lot about imagination. And the abstract piece of this framework that I love is that it holds the imagination that we can redesign the ways in which we think and we relate to each other, and the ways that we act, both as individual people and then as contributors and leaders within organizations and different communities as well. I love the affirmation that we're stronger together, and that as we do our work, it is a peregrination, it's a journey. We will make mistakes, we will have impacts we don't intend to have. But if we're in the work together and we build enough trust and belief in each other to work through those moments of impact we don't intend together, that we can get through them and come out on the other side having learned a bit more and being a different kind of contributor. That's really powerful to me. I think that abstract piece ties into the pragmatic piece that I love. The framework doesn't stop with principles and abstract ideas, but it moves into an action plan. And we're already finding that that action plan, as they always are, needs to adapt as our context continues to shift so rapidly. So we've already noted changes to that as we've worked on federal budget submissions, as we've thought about the new ways in which we work with communities to end different kinds of poverty. So it's not that the action plan is complete in and of itself, but I love the pragmatic and practical goals that it helps us use to take the first steps forward in what can be a very complex, overwhelming body of work. You're muted, Rochelle.
I'll never not do that. I think that when people think about their equity contributions, they're really hard on themselves. And what you shared, Danya, is that we can shift the timeline. We can shift the metric of success. We can shift what the goal is that we're hoping to achieve, but that we're on this peregrination. We're always trying to understand what equity and justice and reconciliation, what belonging means to community, to the people that are doing this work, and make the actions speak to the moment that we're in that time with the knowledge that we have. I'm going to move us to a question directed at Danya and Dina. Looking back, so Power of Discourse Consulting really started off this equity audit for us, and they actually drafted like the base of what the framework is that you see today. But at some point, as board members and as leadership, we decided that we needed to take ownership and do the final edits and revisions needed to make this something that we could publish. So my question is, what made it clear that we needed to take ownership of carrying this work forward? So first, I'm going to ask Danya, and then Dina, you could follow.
Well, first I'll note with what's already been said in so many different ways. This is work that has been evolving for years and years and years, and well before I was on this team. I want to, in particular, thank our colleague and board member Ana Gonzalez Guerrero, whose energy for Tamarack to make more explicit commitments I heard really shape our journey in my very first days here at Tamarack. For me, the realization that we needed to extend our timeline and do more work internally came from the questions that started to come up as Power of Discourse gave us their recommendations. Questions around how do we reconcile commitments to both peace and justice, which sometimes are not the same? How do we hold equity in a context where our work is to be driven by community? Communities are so diverse in their beliefs and approaches. And questions like what public policies and priorities will we prioritize? The need to have these discussions in a thoughtful way and to make sure that we were hearing many perspectives and listening well really for me motivated the need to do the work internally. Yeah, I think in the process, the last thing I would say there is I'm so glad we did it for many reasons, including that the trust and the understanding of each other that came through doing the work ourselves has had phenomenal impacts for me anyway on all the bodies of work that we are a part of.
Thanks, Danya. Dina, you could jump in.
Yeah, and I hope it's okay. I'm going to speak a little bit from kind of my personal vantage point, just because it's really shaped kind of my experience on the board over the last 2 years. So when I had come in to the board, as Danya mentioned, there was already quite a bit of work to kind of initiate some of these processes. We were just kind of at the heels of this big equity audit, which was very involved. And just as that was wrapping up is when we saw the events of October 7th unfold and the escalation of violence and genocide in Palestine. And for me personally, I'm an Arab Muslim woman. I was born in Egypt. I immigrated here with my family as a child and, grew up in a big, kind of loud, fulsome Arab community with Egyptians, Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Sudanese, Moroccans, Yemenis, like the whole, mixed bag. And I have, several Palestinian family members and loved ones whose relatives have been killed, well before 2023 and as recently as last month. And, just as kind of police brutality and anti-Black racism was not new knowledge when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, and just as kind of the extent of horrific systemic abuse in residential schools were not new knowledge for Indigenous communities when the first set of unmarked graves were discovered. I don't remember a time in my life where, even from when I was a child, where I wasn't acutely aware of the ethnic cleansing in Palestine and, the broader impact on the region, because colonialism doesn't like to stay put, of course. But of course, there's been, thanks to decades of, erasure, censorship, dehumanization, whitewashing, greenwashing, pinkwashing, all of the forms of washing. I came into that first discussion with the board in a very different place than other folks have. And it was, a challenging conversation. And of course, there were some, gaps in other folks' understandings. And, many folks were visibly uncomfortable discussing it. I think that's a pretty common feature of this. And I could tell folks were really trying to be supportive of me personally, but I think beyond that, it was something that felt like a bit of tension. So I think that it's really interesting because people always like lament, these moments of polarization and the polarization of our time. And I think that's very true. But I think sometimes the natural kind of almost logical next step is that, neutrality is a virtue. And sometimes this like romanticization of neutrality that only serves the status quo of power and, kills through inaction. So I think these moments of polarization, although in the short term there's real and violent consequences, I think these are also the moments where, we stand to learn something, we stand to hear new information. It exposes our blind spots. It brings kind of assumed or unspoken beliefs into the light, and it ultimately changes the course of history. And I have to say that I'm always very impressed at kind of what comes out of Tamarack at the staff level. And we have a really excellent board, and I think we've made many strides, and of course still have lots of work to do. And I think the Seeds of Transformation framework is a very kind of practical way to help us do that. Rochelle, you're on mute again.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I was just saying thank you so much for the work you're doing on the board and the approach that you take to these conversations. The vulnerability, bringing your lived experience is so critical. And you really held us to account of what is it that we're trying to say and how are we going to live that out? How are we going to action that? And that I think the opening part of Seeds of Transformation is one of my favorite parts because it just involves so much dialogue, as Danya was alluding to as well. Dina, you've shared about some of the roadblocks and how do we have these conversations and how do we not get stuck in this place of neutrality? But I'm curious from all the other panelists today, what are some of the roadblocks and challenges that you've experienced while interpreting seeds of transformation, while trying to action it, while trying to live out its commitments. So whoever wants to start can kick us off. Allison.
It might tie into a question you're going to ask later, but I'm thinking about accountability and going beyond traditional accountability. Um, I think a challenge is being able to be open and honest with ourselves and with others about our learnings and our progress. Um, Jodine had mentioned equity can't be an afterthought. It's foundational to trust, legitimacy, and impact. So I think when it's seeds of transformation, when we think about our progress and our success and reflecting on that for the year, we have to really recognize that things are changing, right? That our organization, the work, the culture, the environment, the context in which we work is always changing. So it can't be about checking boxes. It can't be about the number of actions that we've started or completed. We want to celebrate the wins, and we want to take the time to reflect and learn from where we might have fallen behind. And it'll set us up a lot better going into the next year.
Thanks, Allison. Danya, Guyaness, did you want to share any of the roadblocks that you've experienced and how you're overcoming them? Guyaness.
I think the major roadblock that I've faced and some of the people I've spoken with, being an Indigenous person, is it's mostly it's self-related. I think as we're moving forward and we're trying to co-create spaces for inclusion, um, the language we use really does have an impact on those relationships, and the tone, the intention. Those are things that are you really have to pay attention to that. When I say you, I mean we really have to pay attention to how we put that energy out there. And sometimes I've experienced I don't want to term it a power dynamic, but I think it's just people just not knowing any better and not realizing, the moment you wake up in the morning sets your day in motion. And if you're coming in a frazzled way, sometimes what you've intended to share with someone doesn't come out the way it really needs to, because your mind is still on how you woke up and what you didn't finish doing at home. So I think that's the biggest challenge I've been facing with people as I'm continuing to do my work on myself in the spaces that have now called me home. And spaces that have called me home are working with Indigenous people, Indigenous populations, because many times I've worked out there, but now I'm kind of bringing it in now. And I see how that energy flows back and forth. And when you don't have a clear understanding of where people are coming from, especially on the streets, I think it's easy to judge, it's easy to prejudge, and it's easy to keep it simple. I'm going to keep saying that is to keep it simple. And I think that's been the challenge is telling myself every day, you're going to encounter people who are not at the same space you're at. They're not in the same frequency you're vibrating in, because sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be one of those days. And I have to tone it down for me to be able to create the we. And that's why I really appreciated the section on love, because it begins from the moment you get up. And I really, really believe firmly, because of troubled times, that all of our ancestors are really speaking out loudly and saying, hey, will you just acknowledge me? I'm like right here. It's not hard to give 5 minutes and acknowledge creation and where you're standing and who you're with before you go out there in the world and put on a different face than what you're actually bringing. And I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think that's the biggest challenge. It's not really about what's out there. It's about what's here and making sure we're bringing it forward the best way possible with love and care, respect, and the simplicity of who we are. Even though we're very complex, we can still bring the simplicity of just self-care and love and bringing that forward.
Thank you, Guyaness. It's a very important reminder, and it reminds me we have to be good ourselves in order to go out and help others, to help community. And we need that self-awareness of what's our social location, what identities am I carrying into this work, what experiences are informing my approach to this work, how do I fill those gaps of knowledge that I have and seek out more perspectives. So thank you for those words. Danya, we'll go to you.
So any Hamilton fans might recognize the expression in the room where it happens. So a roadblock or a learning for me in this work has been that when you're in a position professionally, like I am and like many of us here are, of being in the room where it happens, change doesn't always feel that hard. You're really close to the origins of the change. Your role demands you to make changes. But that's the experience of a very few. Change is really hard when you're not close to the origins of it. And so continuing to share openly, as my wonderful colleagues here all have, a roadblock for me has been underestimating the amount of change that some of the work expressed in these commitments has demanded. And not stopping often enough to engage in the reflection process that we talk about, and really being in conversation with people about why we need to do a thing, what the doing might look like, listening for what the losses might be, and then continuing to stay in conversation to try to work through or mitigate those losses. I've learned a lot about change in this process.
Thanks, Danya. I want to make sure that I get to the audience question we had from Emmanuel from NABC. Emmanuel is asking, how do we ensure equity-seeking groups are acknowledged and resourced for the work we do? The Equity Recovery Collective brought together 16 different sectors, orgs, including NABC, and equity leadership requires that equity advocates lift up equity-seeking groups, mostly under-resourced and burnt out. I just want to quickly share that recently this year we published our equitable gratitude and compensation policy. I might be mixing up the name of the policy, but it essentially guides how we can use reciprocity as well as financial compensation to think about how we're working with our partners. And so there's Indigenous protocols for how we're approaching work with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. There's some guidelines for what's appropriate financial compensation that's works within Tamarack's budget to be able to invite people to participate. Guyaness has done a lot of documentation reviews along with Elder Bonnie Evans with us. And so I just wanted, I think Shanice has just shared the link to that, so you can check that out. But I also think we've heard a lot about care and love. And so how are we actually having conversations and building relationships with these communities to be able to ask them to step into our work, to ask what their capacity is, to ask what they need in order to support the work in a good way. So I just wanted to quickly answer that question. I'm just gonna in one breath or less for the panel before we wrap up. I'm wondering what advice you have for others that are considering a similar journey. How can they sustain this work in a meaningful way? And Mairead, Shanice, if you could share the infographic that just shows Tamarack's journey that people can explore on our website as well. So Allison, Dina, Danya, and Guyaness, if you want to answer, what's your piece of advice?
Sure, I would say make sure everyone's involved from the beginning, make sure everyone feels like they have a place, a role, opportunities to learn, and that they're able to leverage their unique strengths and assets.
Thanks, Allison. Dina?
I would just say that you don't have to do everything. You just have to do something meaningful. And the beauty of it is that all of our issues are connected. It's the same systems that are responsible for climate destruction, genocide, poisoning indigenous lands and water, separating families, keeping communities impoverished. So a win for one struggle, it weakens the status quo and makes success possible for all of us.
Thank you, Dina. Danya?
I would say that feeling of deep discomfort in your belly that you only get when something feels risky means that maybe you should do it. And it's fleeting. And when you do the thing that seems impossible with other people, it starts to feel a lot more possible. And Dina, you said something so powerful on the action of inaction. Inaction and not taking the risk is inaction, is action. And so let's take the action that makes us feel uncomfortable in the short term and do it together.
Thanks, Danya. And Guyaness?
I think again, like the message I always got from my elders was don't forget, just keep it simple because people are gonna formulate what they need in the moment. And I know it's possible to transform spaces that are dark or that are ugly. I always say ugly, and ugly to me is dark and it just feels yucky. But you can bring kindness and love to those spaces and kind of pull in someone who has the same amazing energy and thought process that you have, and then it just gets bigger and brighter and brighter. And I really appreciated, Dina, what you shared. And I felt that as you were talking. And I've always been of that mind. Like sometimes it's easy to stay in the middle and just be comfortable, but we're in troubled times where we need to move our uncomfortableness into, into the side and step forward because we're not alone. We don't come here alone and we don't do the work alone. And even though we might not find somebody who's physical, we have to remember we have our ancestors with us. And we're able to call upon them anytime because they're here and say, need your help. I need you to step up with me and help me to feel stronger today because this is what I'm going to be doing. It's that simple. And it happens. And I really firmly believe in that. And I really encourage others to do the same, to, be mindful of when you get up in the morning, bring that forward, start your day. And it's almost like, to me, I call it a spiritual armor. Spiritual armor is when, yes, it's you hold yourself proud and it's like, yes, I can do this because I know I'm capable and I'm able. And I have my troop with me, so to speak.
Thank you, Guyaness. What a beautiful way to end out today's conversation. I want to thank Jodine, Mairead, Shanice, Allison, Dina, Danya, yourself, Guyaness, for joining this conversation and just supporting this work overall. I know that the one thing that I'm taking away is that the people matter, the way we show up for ourselves, the way we show up to our work matters, and this work requires dialogue. It requires us to be willing to adapt, to grow, to change, to learn. And so I hope you can take some of the insights that have been shared today into your weeks and into the many months and years ahead. I'm going to turn it over to Shanice just to close us out and talk about some upcoming learning opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rochelle, Dina, Allison, Danya, Guyaness. This was an amazing panel. I'm seeing all the beautiful words of encouragement and thanks in the chat, so please feel free to look at that. You all did such an amazing job. These are some upcoming webinars and learning opportunities that we'd love for you to all be a part of. So we hope that you'll join us again for some upcoming opportunities, such as from October 16th to November 6th. We have a 4-part workshop series on equity and belonging in community change that will be co-facilitated by Rochelle and I. And throughout this learning journey, participants will explore how to foster inclusive policies, relationships, and environments while also learning tools to disrupt exclusionary practices. And this will be through a lens of relational accountability and equity-centered systems change. And this cohort will offer participants foundational skills and strategies for embedding equity and inclusion to their everyday work. We also would like to remind you that we launched the Equity and Anti-Racism Coaching and Consulting practice that myself and Rochelle are very proud of. We offer support in policy review and development, customized curriculum development, and embedding equity and anti-racism into systems change. And then I will pass it off to Marae to just close us off. But again, thank you so much to the panelists and all of you for participating in this. And I hope to see your faces in other spaces.
Thank you so much, Shanice, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a really wonderful session. We would love to continue the conversation with you, so please stay connected to Tamarack and stay tuned for the full recording and all of the links and resources shared in the chat. Thank you all for coming today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.